Awesome. Yeah.
Welcome to the Sleep Experience podcast, where we take a deep dive into the latest sleep hacks, gadgets, and strategies to skyrocket your productivity to new heights. Being a high performer is all about resting at 100%, so you can execute at 100%.
Side effects of medication, they weren't doing anything for me, so I felt like my back was up against the wall.
Hey, this is Riley, host of the Sleep Experience Podcast. At the Sleep Experience Podcast, we interview health experts and teach our community how upgrading their sleep is the one thing that they need to unlock their biological code and maximize their performance in an effortless way by doing more with less. Do you want to become a productivity machine, have genius ideas automatically pop into your mind, stop feeling so stressed, build better relationships, and generate more income? Optimizing your deep sleep can do just that. Visit www.thesleepconsultant.com to learn more. My guest today is J.W. Biava. J.W. is a Laboratory Director of Immunolytics, a leading mycology lab used by doctors, pharmacists, and environmental specialists to analyze mold samples and help evaluate patients' homes, schools, and work environments, a vital step towards healthier life. Their lab utilizes cutting-edge mold analysis, focusing on mold identification and mold counts to determine if contamination is present and what steps must be taken to eradicate if it is. J.W., welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. I have all types of guests on this podcast, from genetics to hormones and everything else. But one of the hidden stressors of a lot of people's biology is mold, and they don't realize how much that affects their sleep. But first, before getting into all that, I'm very curious with your story. What got you into mold in the first place?
Well, it's kind of a combination of a few things. So, the story starts when I was 13 years old and I wanted to buy my uncle's 1976 BMW 530i that was rusting in the backyard. It was actually my grandpa's car before. And he said, come work for me at my laboratory. And so I said, sure. And I started working when I was 13. And about 1995, we really started getting into mold analysis, just doing traditional spore trap type analyses to see if environments were contaminated with amplified mold growth. And then early 2000s, I met a guy named Walter Hayhurst, who was really a pioneer. He and Dr. Donald Dennis out of Atlanta, who really understood the health effects of mold and what it was doing to their patients. And so we started Immunolytics as a spinoff from my dad and uncle's laboratory to kind of help address those medical patients. So they'd have an easy do-it-yourself test kit to help evaluate their environments and see if that could be causing health symptoms. So that's kind of where it all started.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's always interesting hearing the origin story and to hear how that was with you. I find that fascinating. Switching gears here, what top level down, what is mold and where does it come from, and how prevalent do you see it in people's homes today?
Sure. Well, that's a bunch of great questions. Mold is extremely prevalent. It's ubiquitous in all environments. North Pole, South Pole probably have the lowest amount of mold, but it's essentially nature's garbage disposal, right? It's a biologic mechanism to break down organic material. So think leaves and compost, things like that. Mold's very, very important. The problem becomes when we build houses with these interstitial spaces, wall spaces, ceiling spaces, behind cabinetry, under cabinetry, these spaces like that, where essentially if water gets in there and the substrate's organic, it's drywall backing, it's wood 2x4s, well, then the mold's just going to start growing because the mold is everywhere. So if it grows unchecked, you get these amplified levels that essentially affect health. So it's mold is extremely useful in the right environment. It's extremely harmful if you're overly exposed.
I can imagine. And you hear the stories of people have health issues for years upon years, and then they find out they have mold 1 or 2 decades later, remove it, and voila, all their health symptoms start to disappear. So when someone's exposed to a moldy environment, they're breathing in these toxic spores and other matter that go into their body. And do they actually get stored there?
Yes. So a lot of the toxins are lipophilic, they're fat loving. And so they'll get stored in the fat and released over time. Yeah. And that's part of what really tied this into sleep, which I thought was brilliant that you recognized, is the idea that, the detox, a lot of that occurs during sleep. Yeah. So if these toxins disrupt the sleep, which happens. You get in this vicious cycle where you're toxic and you can't detox
Mhm.
without proper sleep. So yes, they're stored in the body, they're moved around the body. Mold essentially affects people as an allergen, which a lot
Yeah.
just dismiss because allergies are allergies.
Yeah.
It can be an infectious agent. It can act as like a super antigen where you get autoimmune type reactions.
Yeah.
And then of course many molds produce the mycotoxins,
Yeah.
which are poisons.
Yeah, and it causes people to sort of feel sometimes like that drunk brain fog feeling that people get. And it doesn't have to be a disease state or autoimmune necessarily. It can just be if you want to have a peak 10 out of 10 performance, you're taking all these supplements, you're following the right diet. It's the mold can just, bring that 10 level you should be at down to a 7 or down to a 5, even if you're doing everything right. And I see so many people like that. We'll do functional diagnostic testing on them, and then we'll look at their mycotoxins in their body. Is just off the charts sometimes, especially if their body genetically they just can't flush that out, and their lymphatic system and their glutathione in their body, their internal garbage truck cleaners to flush that out of their body while they're sleeping. It's just compromised. So now you have this environment that's just a breeding ground of the mold getting stored there, and it just creates this cascade effect. And it's no wonder people are sick for so long.
Yeah, well, you absolutely nailed it there. So
Yeah, I'm sure you see all kinds of people with that. So once someone finds mold, what exactly can they do to eradicate it from their home?
sure. Well, we look at it as total mold load in a house and then look at it as mold hygiene, right? So
Mm,
there's a lot of sources for mold. The most destructive is wet building materials. That's where you
mm,
focus a lot. But your sink drains are disgusting. If you ever swabbed one of those, they're loaded
yeah,
with mold. So you can do simple things maintenance wise, like treating your drains or just covering your drains.
mm,
Pets bring in a lot of mold from the outside, so keep them properly washed.
yeah,
Um, there's little hygienes like that, but the biggest problem is the wet building materials. So what
mm,
you want to do is eliminate moisture. If there's no
yeah,
moisture, there's no mold. That's
yeah,
number one. You don't want humidity above 60%. I mean, I suggest everybody buy a $15 hygrometer on Amazon, monitor their humidity, make sure it's below 60% so that you don't have any mold growth from humidity, especially in bathrooms and laundry rooms, which are real prone to humidity. Keep those levels down. Easiest way is ventilation. If you're in a real high humid environment, it may require dehumidification, but that's real simple. And then if you have a water event, whether it's a spill, a flood, a broken pipe, a roof leak, those materials need to be dry within 48 hours as a general rule of thumb to prevent exponential mold growth. So if you can get things dry quick enough, that's your best option. Water is a far larger risk to a house than even like fire or burglary. There's just so many water events. I think EPA estimates 1 in 3 homes will have a water event in a given year, and 50% are contaminated with some level of mold. So it's very important that we address the water. Yeah, essentially what we do that's kind of unique to us is we do use the Petri dishes for a 1 hour exposure to see if the levels in the air are amplified. We also use them for tap testing objects to see if those objects are sources of mold. And then we use swabs to identify potential mold growth as well as dust that may have amplified mold in it. And that's 50% what we do. The other 50% is the consultation that is free with the kits, where we actually have an indoor environmental professional look at your results and ask you probing questions to try to potentially find mold sources or biologic sources that could affect your health that may have been missed by a test. Maybe the wrong place was sampled. Maybe you sampled your home and not your car. And we kind of probe to try and help you fine tune and figure out where the problem is. Well, absolutely true. And you asked earlier, what do you do when you have mold? I guess I didn't fully answer that. And that the correct or the correct solution to that is you remove any source of mold, and it has to be done under proper conditions so you don't contaminate everything. So maintenance or reducing the total the mold load in a home is important. But if there is mold growth, that has to be directly addressed by removal. Boy, that's a great question. So remember, I'm an environmental guy and not a medical guy, okay? But I can speak from my experience of what I've done for myself and my family. If I look at detox strategies, my absolute favorite is a sauna detoxification. especially using the niacin. I think that's incredibly powerful, actually too powerful for me. You have to do it very, very slowly or you get very, very sick. As well as, I do a lot of things from, I've done some ionic foot baths. I've done some of the vibration type therapy where you just kind of vibrate yourself. I like what we call the thumper, just a little massage gun that helps move things pretty good. And then supplementation, to remove them with various binders, whether it's the activated charcoal. Some people like the cholestyramine. I'm not a big fan of it, but it does work for those people. There's a lot of natural binders, whether it's zeolites or bentonite clay, chlorella. So, that's where you come in, right? That's a little outside of my area of expertise. Well, that's a great question. Those of us who have been exposed to the mold, the kind of the moldies, as we call it, you get real good at identifying these things because you have to go eat out. You have to go to grocery stores, libraries, church, school, whatever. So you have to get good at diagnosing the environment as soon as you walk in to tell if it's potentially going to affect your health. Those of us, like myself, that are very sensitive, we can perceive it. Some people, smell is easy. To me, if it feels like a dark cave, like if it's closing in on me, the mold levels are high. It's just the way my body like interprets it. It's not like I have some mystical power. So those are good ways. I mean, obviously power of observation. So I look first at HVAC vents. If they're really dark and discolored black, that's not a good sign. If I see any signs of water damage, so you're looking for spots on the ceiling or walls, paint that's pulling off, or what they call nail pop. And that's when the drywall expands because it got too moist. And then when it contracts, the nail still sticks out. That's an indication of excessive moisture. Age of building, certainly the older a building is, more likely it is to have a water leak. But new buildings do actually have mold problems often too. Sometimes due to construction defects. Sometimes it's contaminated building materials. So you just kind of get good at observing, watching, looking, and then feeling yourself to determine what's going on. Well, there is a lot of there's a lot of science, a lot of research, a lot of doctors that make it extremely complex because they describe the biotoxin pathways and how to remove it. They get into the genetics and all that. That's great. We try and keep it as simple as possible. I mean, find it, remove it from both the environment and yourself to get well. So as far as where it's going to go, I think the most important part is just awareness. So few people understand what a problem indoor mold exposure is, that if we can get the word out on that, we're going to heal so many people or help them achieve optimal fitness or whatever it may be, productivity, just by their awareness and improving their environment. It's just very interesting to me that everybody really seems to understand that you need clean water, clean food to be well, but very few people focus on the clean air. We understand it from a smog standpoint outdoors, but no one thinks about the indoor pollution and what they're breathing. Sure, air filters are wonderful. I call them a polishing technique. And what I mean by that is that you can't have visible mold growth and have an air filter and be fine. And my example here is, there's a lot of great air filters. I like the Austin Air personally because it's very simple and it has the carbon and the zeolite filtration as well. The IQ Air are great. Air Doctor are great. I mean, there's a lot of them now. But if I put a cup of gasoline in that room with you right now and the best air filter possible and put it on high, you're still going to smell the gasoline. So see, the point is that source removal is absolutely number one. After that, polishing techniques such as air filtration is huge. And you can make a big difference just by changing your HVAC filter to something that's rated for allergens. They say a MERV rating of 11 or higher, but if they just say on there to remove allergens, that's a big improvement. And mold travels just like dust. So if you reduce the dust in your environment, you're reducing the mold. So keep your house clean, carpets clean, cabinets clean, whatever it may be, and you're going to reduce the mold levels. Boy, last words. I think everybody should just be aware of this. This shouldn't be something you're scared of, but it should be something you investigate. I think it's very, very important to keep yourself and your family healthy and safe. And this is just one of those ways to do it. Immunolytics.com. We've got great resources if people want to learn about mold. We're a do-it-yourself type company, and we try and educate you and empower you so that you don't spend a fortune on mold. So look at the website, learn. If you want, call us, anytime, 505-217-0339. We'll answer your questions.
Thanks for listening to the Sleep Experience podcast. We'll see you next time on next week's episode. Be sure to subscribe and follow us to get future updates on everything sleep, energy, focus, stress, and better performance.